Who are the mysterious Witches of Sin and Sin Archbishops in ReZero? What are their terrifying powers and what are their true intentions? In this video, I'll break down their backstories, powers, personalities, and the massive role that they play in both the lore and the plot of ReZero. I will also be simping for everyone's favorite lazy waifu segment, and I make absolutely no apologies. If you guys like my ReZero videos and you want me to make more in the future, leave a quick like and comment for that YouTube algorithm. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do me a huge favor and subscribe right now. It is completely free, but it helps me out a lot, and it also tells me that you want to see more ReZero content. Now let's jump into the video, spoilers and all. Long ago, there were 7 powerful witches, each tied to one of the 7 deadly sins. This includes greed, envy, gluttony, lust, wrath, and sloth. These witches had special powers called witch factors, which they could use in epic and often dangerous ways. They didn't always work together, and they mostly followed their own desires, causing trouble and provoking fear throughout the world. Because of this, the witches became known as terrifying forces. People eventually got so scared of them that they decided to put an end to the witches' rampages, and they hunted them down one by one. However, some stories say that it was actually the Witch of Envy, Capella, who killed the other witches and then eventually went on a rampage that destroyed half the world. The 7 main witches left a lasting mark on the world before they vanished, but 2 other witches, representing vanity and melancholy, existed even before them. While the others were apparently killed, the Witch of Vanity was rumored to have survived and continued wandering the world. The last of the main 7 witches vanished about 400 years ago. At that time, a huge event known as the Great Calamity occurred. During this event, Capella, the Witch of Envy, is said to have destroyed half the world before finally being defeated by a team of legendary heroes, but even after being defeated, she still couldn't be killed. Though the witches are mostly gone, some of their powers remain in the hands of others, like the Sin Archbishops of the witch cult, who use them to pursue their own insane and twisted goals. The witches' powers are both fascinating and deadly. Together, these witches literally shaped the world, leaving behind fearsome legacies and sometimes misunderstood backstory. But despite their immense legacies, in the present time, talking about the witches is actually forbidden. Even mentioning them is taboo, especially the Witch of Envy, Capella. Capella was the strongest of all the Witches of Sin. After taking in the witch factor of envy, she developed the power of envy, but it seems that she wasn't really suited for it, and so this power ended up splitting her personality in 2. One side of her personality was calm and kind. This was the Capella persona, but the other, the Witch of Envy persona, was dangerous and merciless, and she showed no hesitation or remorse in harming others. One day, Capella went on a wild rampage known as the Great Calamity, during which she destroyed half the world. Unable to actually kill her, a group of powerful heroes finally trapped her in a sealed shrine at the edge of the world. They hoped that she would stay sealed away forever, but 400 years later, a boy named Natsuki Subaru was mysteriously summoned to this world, and Capella was the one who summoned him. She also gave him a special power called Return by Death. While it's unclear why Capella brought Subaru to this world, she claimed that she gave him his power because she loves him. So it's pretty clear that even though she is sealed away, Capella is still actively influencing the world of ReZero in important ways, and our main protagonist Subaru is the primary example of that. Capella is able to use the authority of envy. The exact nature of her power remains unclear, although she was said to be a capable yin magic caster. We know that Capella can create and control shadows on a massive scale. She can also use her shadows to create tendrils and hands that she uses to capture or attack her enemies. Sometimes she can even slip these shadows inside someone's body to destroy them from within. It's believed that she can summon over 2,000 shadow hands at the same time. Wait. You're telling me that Capella has a split personality, has superhuman powers which involve magical shadow hands attacking her enemies, and she has a mysterious romantic connection to the main character? Looks like the creator of ReZero is a pretty big fan of Elfen Lied. don't you think? One of Satella's most troublesome powers is her immortality. She can be injured, but she can't be killed. Even the epic team-up of the Great Sage Flugel, the strongest sword saint Reed Astrea, and the Divine Dragon couldn't kill her, so they had to settle for sealing her away. Her long life is likely also due to her half-elf blood, and she has remained alive in her sealed shrine for over 4 centuries. As I mentioned, Satella is the one who gave Subaru his unique power called Return by Death. This allows Subaru to come back to life after he dies, as if turning back the clock on his own life. Although she hasn't been seen to directly control time, Satella can stop time around Subaru whenever he tries to tell others about his Return by Death ability, making it seem as if time froze. Her true reason for giving Subaru's power is not clear. Some believe that it wasn't for him to protect others, but to give him a chance to face his fate without being limited by the constant threat of death. But what will his fate ultimately be? Is Subaru destined to unseal Satella and help her complete her destruction of the world? Obviously he wouldn't do something like that willingly, but is he destined to do it by accident or because he's trying to save someone he loves and he has no other choice? That is perhaps the most interesting mystery in ReZero for me personally, and I can't wait to find out what happens in the end. Echidna, the Witch of Greed, had an endless curiosity and wanted to learn everything. People from all over the world sought her wisdom, and she was skilled in every kind of magic. Her power was known as the Authority of Greed, though again, we don't exactly know how it worked. One of the most fascinating aspects about the powers of the witches is that we know a few details about them here and there. We know that they were extremely overpowered, but in terms of the specific nature of their powers, our information is still very limited. This makes the witches and their abilities even more intriguing because the longer we go without knowing all the interesting details about their powers, the more anxious we are to find out. Now, Echidna was one of the only people able to master all 6 magical elements, although eventually Roswal, who was actually her pupil, learned to match her. Echidna's life ended when the holy dragon Volcanica destroyed her body, but another story claims that Satella, the Witch of Envy, was the one who devoured her. Now this is really interesting to me because this was so long ago and it is so shrouded in myth that we have conflicting stories about what actually happened. I love this because it reminds me of our own world where different sources often tell completely different stories about what really happened in the past. Even after her death, Echidna's soul stayed in the tomb where she was buried. Here, she could meet with anyone who entered, including other witches whose souls she had gathered over time. Eventually, she possessed a half-elf named Ruie, allowing her to move about in the world once more. In this new form, she wore a necklace that holds the soul of the other witches. Echidna was always known for her huge intellect and for creating many powerful items and spells. She even made meteors, which allowed people to use magic without any special powers. One of her most important creations was the Book of Wisdom, a white book that held knowledge about the world. This book didn't just contain information about the past and present, but also about the future. Reading it was difficult for ordinary people since the sheer amount of knowledge could overwhelm them. Even Echidna didn't like using it often because it skipped the process of learning, which she loved. Echidna also created artificial spirits, including the spirits Puck and Beatrice, as well as a variety of magical objects. One of her unique spells allowed her to make clones, and she used this power to create copies of Ruie. She experimented with all these clones in order to discover a way to live forever. Beyond all of this, Echidna used a special type of magic called Dream Arts, which allowed her to make a castle of dreams, a world outside reality where her spirit, along with those of other witches, could appear. This dream world looked like a wide grassy field with a small hill, but it could change to whatever Echidna wanted. She could even make portals that allowed others to come and go within this space. Because it existed outside the real world, Subaru was safe from his Return by Death powers while inside it, though if he died there, his soul would break, causing his real body to die as well. Echidna's curiosity made her eager to learn about Subaru's Return by Death power as soon as she met him. She wanted to help him and even asked to be his advisor to see all the possible outcomes his power could create. She was so curious that she even looked through Subaru's memories, recreating items from his own world. Overall, Echidna's brilliant mind and deep curiosity shaped much of the world's magic, knowledge, and mysteries that continue to affect people long after her death. Although, thinking that Echidna's time has passed is probably a mistake because she's not really done influencing the story and the world of ReZero just yet, is she? Typhon, the Witch of Pride, was a young girl who saw the world in a very simple way. Because her father was an executioner, she believed that anyone who had done something wrong should be punished. She became judge, jury, and executioner, deciding who was guilty on her own and then carrying out the punishment herself. Needless to say, her sense of justice was often naive and sometimes outright wrong. Even if someone only felt a little bit guilty about something small, Typhon might still see them as a sinner. And this means that she sometimes punished people who were actually good and decent just because she had a very simplistic and extreme conception of justice. Typhon acted just like a child, often jumping into things without thinking and not picking up on how others felt. She rarely listened and was very curious about other people's sins, often interrupting to find out if someone was a bad person or not. She didn't really understand deep ideas about good and bad, which is like the worst possible quality to have for someone with incredible power who wants to lord over people as judge, jury, and executioner. Typhon used the authority of pride, a magical power that helped her sense if someone was good or bad just by touching them. She could also tell if someone felt any guilt about their past, even if it was minor. When Typhon thought someone was guilty, her authority would activate, causing their body to shatter like broken glass. Strangely, if the person had a kind heart, they at least wouldn't feel any pain as they were destroyed. So the power itself did make some distinction between good and kind people and genuinely bad and sinful people, but unfortunately Typhon was never able to make that distinction effectively. If someone ever tried to hurt her, Typhon could use her authority to instantly destroy them if she judged them to be guilty. But she still took the hit and felt the impact. It was rumored that she took parts of the sinner's body as payment for their actions. Typhon's power didn't affect creatures that couldn't think or feel guilt, as they didn't understand right and wrong in her eyes. And that is pretty interesting because if that's the case, then you could be like a psychotic sociopath who does horrible things every single day, but as long as you don't actually have a guilty conscience because you're a freaking psycho, you would be safe from Typhon's judgment. I mean, I know that the nature of justice is a complicated question, but whatever the answer ultimately is, it's definitely not the absolutely insane brand of justice that Typhon was dishing out. The Witch of Wrath, Minerva, cared deeply about healing the sick and wounded that she met during her travels. Even though she was powerful and often caused a lot of damage, she never actually meant to harm anyone. Despite her reputation as one of the Witches of Sin, Minerva was actually very kind and compassionate towards regular people. In the past, people around Minerva were constantly fighting, which made her sad and brought her to tears. She eventually decided that crying wouldn't help anyone, so she trained herself to become strong, hoping to stop fights by being powerful enough to scare people out of conflict. But fighting back didn't actually stop the violence, and Minerva then realized that she had been crying out of anger, not just sadness. This led her to start punching people, but surprisingly, her punches healed them instead of hurting them. From that point, Minerva traveled to heal anyone she could find. Though many nations sent troops to try to capture her, no one succeeded. She also had a special sympathy for elves and half-elves like Emilia, and she wanted to protect them. Minerva's magical power, called the Authority of Wrath, let her heal anything by changing the effects of her actions. By striking someone with a punch, a headbutt, or even a thrown object, she could heal their injuries using the world's own mana. She could even undo the harm caused by another witch like Typhon, the Witch of Pride. Personally, I think this is a really cool way to subvert our expectations about what the power of wrath would be. You'd think that the power of wrath would be to bring about massive chaos and destruction on a great scale, but in ReZero it's actually the opposite, and I think that's really cool. The downside was that Minerva couldn't turn off her healing powers. If she actually wanted to hit someone or throw a rock at them, they would still be healed, whether she wanted to help them or not. This made it so Minerva couldn't hurt anyone directly, not even an insect. Also, her healing took mana from random places around the world, which sometimes caused natural disasters, and this harmed others far away from where she was. So you can see why over the years people started hating the witches so much. Even when they were trying to do good, like heal people, they were accidentally hurting other people somewhere else. Even if they didn't necessarily mean to hurt anyone, people eventually decided that the witches had to be taken out once and for all for the safety of the entire world. The Witch of Gluttony, Daphne, always felt endlessly hungry, and she was more focused on filling her stomach than actually enjoying the taste of food. Her hunger was so strong that she would sometimes even eat things like rugs, curtains, or clothes when there was nothing else around. A long time ago, Daphne was used in an experiment by a man who wanted to be immortal. When the experiment worked, Daphne found herself alone in a castle with a terrible hunger that never went away. She ate everything that she could find in the castle, but her hunger was still unbearable. To solve the problem of hunger, Daphne used her powers to create creatures called witch beasts to give people a new source of food. She thought that if something could eat, it could also be eaten. After a while, she broke free and left the castle, and so did the witch beasts she had created, and then they spread out around the world. Daphne strongly believed in the survival of the fittest, and she thought that every life should have a fair chance of surviving, not just humans. She believed that the witch beasts would actually solve world hunger, because if humans and other races were strong enough to hunt them, then they could eat them and they would never go hungry again. But once again, even though Daphne might have had good intentions initially, people came to believe that the witch beasts were made to destroy the world, not to help solve hunger. Daphne's power is called the Authority of Gluttony, but as is so often the case in ReZero, the exact abilities of Daphne's authority remain unknown. That said, we do know that Daphne's witch beast creation ability allowed her to create living things from nothing using what she called her third mouth. She created all of the witch beasts, including the 3 great witch beasts. These are of course the white whale that can erase anything with its mist, the great rabbit who endlessly multiplies and only eats living things, and the black serpent that spreads terrible disease wherever it slithers, cursing the land behind it. The 3 great witch beasts are extremely powerful and cause great harm to anyone who crosses their path. Though Daphne's exact abilities are still not completely known, she's considered to be very overpowered. She was said to be able to eat an entire white whale in one bite, which shows her own incredible strength, a strength that is far greater than even the overpowered beasts that she has created. The Witch of Lust, Carmela, was a shy girl who didn't really care about love, even though she represented the sin of lust. But she did think that love was important to life, and sometimes she helped people see the love around them that they couldn't notice on their own. Her gentle beauty caused a lot of trouble, with entire kingdoms fighting to win her over. Despite all this attention she received, Carmela was actually very unsure of herself, and she often spoke quietly with her eyes down and with a nervous stutter. She was polite, always trying to keep the peace, and she acted very timid, especially around other witches of sin. She even joined Echidna's plan to bring Subaru to the Castle of Dreams, though she knew it wouldn't end well for her. Carmela's low confidence often made her seem weak, and she would shy away from anyone who looked angry, begging them not to hurt her. This probably came from people being harsh to her in the past. A long time ago, Carmela was just a normal girl, loved by her village and engaged to be married. One day, a powerful man came to her village and tried to claim her, making the people so angry that they fought against him. The news spread, and soon there were huge fights happening between cities, all claiming it was to protect her. Carmela was treated like some sort of heavenly maiden, though she didn't want that kind of attention. After a major kingdom fell, her fiancé proposed to her at the top of a castle. But by then, Carmela felt empty, seeing that her simple life had vanished, and so she left him and everything behind. Carmela's power is called the Authority of Lust, also known as the Faceless Bride. It lets her captivate people so deeply that they forget everything else. They stare at her so intensely that they can't breathe or even feel pain, sometimes forgetting to keep their hearts beating. This often leads to their death without them even knowing it. She can also make people see and hear her as someone they love, like when Subaru saw her in the form of Rem. Carmela used her Authority of Lust to help Subaru understand Satella's feelings for him, showing she could help people feel and recognize love. Carmela is another example of a witch who didn't intentionally want to hurt anyone, but her very existence caused chaos and conflict through no fault of her own. It's almost like the witch factors are curses upon their users rather than just powers that make them stronger. The Witch of Sloth, Sekhmet, was so lazy that she barely even moved or did anything at all, perfectly fitting her title as the Witch of Sloth. And so what? I don't want to hear any Sekhmet slander in the comment section, you guys. Nothing wrong with a woman who just wants to Netflix and chill. But despite being lazy, she was actually known as the second most powerful witch, just behind Satella. She could apparently beat all the other witches at once with no trouble. And out of all the witches, she also appeared to be the calmest and safest to meet. Sekhmet had a lot of common sense, and she often looked out for the younger witches like Typhon. Before she was born, Sekhmet's family, the Giants, had big hopes for her. They thought that she could help them bring back their founder, a figure they called God. But after she was born, she didn't live up to their hopes, which led them to abandon her. Years later, people from a nearby town heard about a wild woman living in the mountains and went to bring her to their city. In the city, she learned more about life and emotions, and she seemed to be grateful for that. But not understanding her feelings and not knowing how to express her gratitude and appreciation, she suddenly killed the men who had brought her there and then returned to her homeland. There, she also killed her entire family, not realizing that she was feeling anger and wanting revenge, and not knowing how to properly deal with those emotions. She later returned to the city where she learned so much, and she buried the men that she had killed even though she shouldn't have, and this finally allowed her to find some peace and a bit of happiness in being alone. Sekhmet's power was called the Authority of Sloth. Sekhmet could control an invisible force that let her hit and crush things without moving at all. Her power was much stronger than that of later users of the Authority of Sloth. This force was totally invisible, had a large reach, and moved very quickly. She used it to hold back Minerva at a tea party, and it was even strong enough to let her fight the divine dragon, though she eventually lost. While the shape of her power was never shown directly, it likely looks like a giant invisible hand, because the witch factor of Sloth is known to look like a hand by nature. The Warlock of Melancholy, Hector, was one of the oldest members of the Witches of Sin and the only known male in the group. As the Warlock of Melancholy, he had a sad, gloomy view of the world and didn't like putting in effort, similarly to the Witch of Sloth. He disliked violence and hard work, but was willing to use both if it helped him get what he wanted. His story has mostly been lost to history, with only a few people even remembering who he was. As you might have guessed, Hector could use the Authority of Melancholy. This power let Hector surround himself with an invisible force field that could crush both living things and magical energy. The closer he got to his target, the stronger the force became. Since he was at the center of this power, the damage was most intense at close range. So for example, by touching Roswell with just a finger, he broke all of his bones, crushed his chest, twisted his limbs, and destroyed his body beyond healing. Hector could also create force fields at a distance by looking at an area or holding out his hand, like when he used it to destroy a hut where Yuzu was hiding, even though he was tens of meters away. The Witch of Vainglory, Pandora, was one of the oldest members of the Witches of Sin, representing the sin of vainglory. She was calm and beautiful, almost like a divine figure, and rarely showed any emotions. Unlike Hector, who was sad, Pandora had no empathy and was very selfish. She did not feel guilty when she caused pain or even when she hurt innocent people. To her, others were just tools or pets, and she didn't see them as equals. And of course, Pandora could use the Authority of Vainglory. While the exact powers of her authority are not entirely clear, Pandora could change things to benefit herself as long as the conditions were right. For example, she could avoid death, bury people instantly, erase someone's presence without a trace, and change people's memories. Although she couldn't control the Black Serpent, she could send it where she wanted it to go. The main use of her authority seemed to be to manipulate things to happen as she desired. When she wanted something to occur, she would simply state it like a narrator, and then it would happen. She could also erase or change memories by touching someone's hand, allowing her to create false memories. If Pandora were ever killed, her death could somehow be rewritten, meaning she could never be permanently defeated by any attack. She could also change how her targets perceived reality, making them believe she was someone else or that other people were her. Her abilities are so overpowered that it's like she is the author of the entire story and she inserted herself into the story just to be super overpowered. Now we see that each witch that Subaru meets teaches him something really important. For example, when he talks to Echidna, she helps him see his flaws. She shows him that he has fears and darker feelings inside of him that he has to deal with. But beyond Subaru, the witches are able to change the entire world around them. Each witch had unique powers and intentions, and these powers affect not just Subaru, but everyone in the kingdom of Rugunica and beyond. For instance, the sins of the witches can create problems for people, and when they use their magic, it leaves a mark on the world. It's like how every action we take can change our lives and the lives of others. The witches show us that our choices matter a lot. Now, as I said, the witches as they were in their physical form disappeared centuries ago, but in the present timeline of ReZero, a group called the Witch Cult is the major villain in the series. These cult members are very dangerous and often appear seemingly out of nowhere. They attack in groups and are so feared that knights are told to kill them on sight. The Witch Cult is made up of regular members called Witch Cultists and powerful leaders called the Sin Archbishops, each of whom represents one of the 7 deadly sins and has special abilities similarly to the witches themselves, although not nearly as strong. The Witch Cult has been around for over 400 years, so ever since the disappearance of the witches themselves, but its true origin continues to be a mystery. Many think that its true purpose is to free Satella from her seal, but no one knows for sure. What we do know is that the witch cultists dedicate themselves completely to the cult, often giving up their lives without hesitation. Petalo Romane Conti, the Sin Archbishop of Sloth, was one of the cult's co-founders. He initially led a moderate side of the group, but later went insane and joined the more radical side led by Regulus Corneus, the Sin Archbishop of Greed. By the time that Natsuki Subaru meets Petalo in the present timeline, he has become a fanatical lunatic and he follows only what's written in his gospel. The gospel is a book that the witch cult members carry, and it is based on the Witch of Greed's Tome of Wisdom. While the original tome shows future events exactly as they will happen, the gospels are only imperfect copies and don't reveal nearly as much. Still, many cultists join the witch cult after mysteriously receiving a gospel of their own. The power of the Sin Archbishops comes from the witch factors that they possess. However, only certain people can use a witch factor safely. If someone isn't compatible with a witch factor, absorbing one will have horrible effects on them. The Sin Archbishops gain special abilities called authorities from their witch factor. These authorities make the Sin Archbishops the most powerful members of the witch cult, placing them at the top of the hierarchy. But using these powers can have serious side effects like causing split personalities or even madness. Each Archbishop's authority is connected to the original witch's sin and reflects the nature of that sin. Now, Petalo Romane Conti, who, as I said earlier, is the Sin Archbishop of Sloth and who initially represented a more moderate faction of the cult, has been working for the cult for hundreds of years, and he wasn't officially given a title of Archbishop until about 300 years after the cult's beginning. His friends, who called him Goose, saw him as a kind person, and he was even close to Beatrice and the Witch of Greed, Echidna. He spent much of his time helping the elves in Elior Forest, where he was in charge of protecting a special seal and often visited a guardian that he cared for deeply. But when 2 powerful members of the cult attacked the forest, Petalo was forced to take in the witch factor of Sloth in order to defend it. This gave him the authority of Sloth, which allowed him to hold off the invaders but didn't prevent him from losing the fight. Pandora, the Witch of Vanity, then used her powers to trick Petalo into killing Fortuna, the woman he loved, which drove him mad and changed him forever. After this, he joined the radical faction of the witch cult and became known for his cruelty, often destroying entire towns while strictly following his gospel. In his madness, Petalo began acting in bizarre ways, like twisting his body or hurting himself by pulling his hair, smashing his head, or breaking his own fingers. You know, the usual edgy emo stuff. Even though he represented Sloth, he believed in living with diligence, and he had a deep devotion to Satella, the Witch of Envy. Following the directions of his gospel with complete dedication, Petalo became one of the witch cult's most active members, and he is responsible for many of its attacks. Petalo's main power is the authority of Sloth, which let him use the unseen hands. These were invisible hands he could control and stretch from his body to attack with great strength. When these hands combine, they can act like giant hands, and at full power, they are as strong as cannonballs. No one except Subaru can actually see these hands, and Petalo could also use the unseen hands to propel himself through the air, making him look like he was flying. Obviously, Petalo is a massive downgrade from everyone's favorite lazy waifu Sekhmet, so yeah, the sin of Sloth really fell off in the last 400 years, not gonna lie. Aside from his authority of Sloth, Petalo knew how to use magic, but he didn't use it much in battle, instead saving it as a backup if his main powers failed him. Since he became a spirit by absorbing the witch factor of Sloth, Petalo has to possess human bodies to anchor himself. He had special followers called Fingers, who were 10 witch cultists acting as his helpers and extra bodies. These followers even had ranks named after human fingers. When Betelgeuse took in the sloth witch factor, his followers allowed him to take over their bodies as vessels. To fully possess a finger, Betelgeuse shared part of his witch factor with the person, but this also hindered his ability to use the unseen hands until he regained those parts. Regulus Corneus, the latest Sin Archbishop of Greed, was known as one of the strongest characters in ReZero due to his power, the Authority of Greed. After taking in the witch factor of greed, Regulus gained the ability to stop time for himself and anything he touched. This made him completely immune to any attacks, no matter how powerful, and because of his frozen state, Regulus never aged and lived for more than 100 years. Regulus didn't care much about other people and always thought he was right no matter what. If anyone dared to go against him or annoyed him in the smallest way, he would hurt and even kill them without hesitation. Although he acted selfishly, he followed his gospel closely and respected Pandora, the Witch of Vanity, as long as her orders didn't interfere with his own will. Alongside the Sin Archbishop of Sloth, Regulus was infamous for his cruelty. Regulus was also known for his strange, long-winded speeches about himself and his beliefs, often confusing or irritating others with his rambling. Though he represented greed, he tried to act like he was unselfish, yet he forced his own selfish views on others. If someone disagreed with him, he would quickly get angry, accuse them of violating his rights, and he would then attack them without mercy, and man, this guy would absolutely kill it on Twitter. Anyway, Regulus' Authority of Greed had two main powers, Lion's Heart and Little King. Lion's Heart let Regulus stop time for his body and everything he touched, including his clothes or even his breath, so that nothing could affect him. He didn't need to eat, drink, or even breathe, and he could ignore all forms of damage, whether from powerful weapons, magic, or just physical impact. However, Regulus could only keep Lion's Heart active for 5 seconds at a time without feeling severe pain, which forced him to turn it off briefly to avoid heart failure. He believed going past 10 seconds was simply impossible for him. Now, Little King was Regulus' way of going around this time limit. He used Little King to link his heart to the hearts of women he claimed as his wives. By giving them a small heart from his Lion's Heart, he could bypass the time limit since their heartbeat kept his heart going. This meant he didn't have to keep turning his power on and off, making him practically invincible. Regulus collected over 200 wives over the years to ensure that even if some were harmed, others would continue to support his power without their knowledge. He kept them nearby so he could feel their love and stay connected to them. By combining Lion's Heart and Little King, Regulus created a nearly unbreakable defense. As long as his wives' hearts continued to beat, he could use his authority without any breaks, making him immune to most attacks and threats, and to being cancelled on Twitter. The current Sin Archbishop of Wrath, Sirius, is one of the most powerful and physically strong members of the witch cult. Sirius is known to be quite unhinged and seems to live in her own world. She obsessively loved Betelgeuse, the former Sin Archbishop of Sloth, and called herself his wife, even though he didn't feel the same way. She often apologizes repeatedly, even when there's no need, and she can't stand it when people disrespect her quote-unquote relationship with Betelgeuse. Like, she's basically a Tumblr shipper, but IRL. Her power, the Authority of Wrath, lets her control people's emotions and share damage across groups. If someone within her range is hurt or killed, Sirius can make others feel the same pain or injury, sometimes causing people to die alongside the original victim. She can even increase emotions like anger or sadness in those around her, making them feel these things as strongly as she wants. Sirius has led a very long life, though it's unknown how or if her authority helps with this. In addition to her powers, she's extremely strong, able to block attacks with her bare hands, and is said to be the physically strongest Sin Archbishop. Sirius wields long golden chains with sharp hooks at the ends, which she wraps around herself. These chains seem endless and are stored in her coat sleeves or simply appear out of thin air when she needs them. In battle, she can control them in unnatural ways, even making them change direction mid-air to follow her target. Her chains are so powerful that they can easily break through stone walls. By combining her strength and her chains, Sirius is a fearsome opponent who can slash with such force that it's said to almost split the sky. Sirius also has great skill in fire magic, which she uses to cover her arms or weapons in intense flames. She often wraps her chains around her arms and lights them on fire, turning her hands into flaming swords that can cut through almost anything, even strong magical ice. Her flaming chains allow her to block attacks and deal massive damage to her enemies, So just like a true Tumblr user, she's an expert in flame wars. The current Sin Archbishop of Lust, Capella, is one of the most dangerous members of the witch cult. Capella's past is mostly unknown, and because of her shape-shifting ability, nobody knows what she really looks like. She's usually seen with golden hair and red eyes, but this might just be another disguise. Her personality is among the cruelest of the Sin Archbishops, and that is saying a lot, and she often insults even her own cult members. She believes that all the world's love and attention should go to her alone and shows no kindness towards anyone else. Capella views everyone as simply bags of meat, existing only to serve her. Among the Sin Archbishops, who are already known for being ruthless, Capella is seen as the most heartless of all, even laughing at the suffering of others. I don't know about you, but I actually think she'd make a very successful VTuber. And if you know anything about the VTuber community, then I'm sure you get it, she fits right in. This is a joke, by the way, don't kill me VTubers, you know I love you. Now, even though her personality is nasty, Capella is very clever. She can trick strong and smart fighters, often turning herself into a helpless looking child to catch enemies off guard. She also carefully studies people, figuring out their strengths and weaknesses so she can make herself look like someone they might trust or fear, then use that to upset them in battle. Her power, the authority of lust, allows her to change her form into just about anything. She can make her voice fit whatever shape she takes, and she often changes herself by adding wings, claws, or turning into a giant black dragon. Her powers also help her heal if she's injured by changing damaged parts of her body into undamaged ones. She once even regrew her head after it was cut off. If Capella touches someone, she can transform them into almost anything she wants to, like frogs, birds, or even strange lumps with no sense or awareness, or in other words, VTuber simps. Known by her followers as Mother, Capella controls people she calls her children to complete different tasks across the 4 great nations. Wow, she even has a name for her VTuber fanbase. Ruie is one of the 3 Sin Archbishops who represents gluttony, and each of these 3 representatives have a different approach to the idea of eating. Ruie represents bizarre eating. Unlike his brother Ruie, who chooses his meals carefully, or his sister Ruie, who likes to eat with certain people, Ruie doesn't care much about what he eats or who he eats it with. For him, eating is about quantity, not quality. In fights, Ruie focuses on taking advantage of his opponent's weaknesses. While Ruie will sometimes give his opponents a chance, Ruie will not. He sees fighting as just a way to get his next meal. Ruie has the power called the authority of gluttony. With this authority, Ruie can eat a person's name and memories. To do this, he touches someone with his left hand and then licks his palm. By consuming names and memories, he can take in his victim's talents, skills, and experiences. But if he tries to eat a fake name, he gets very sick, and if he tries to eat memories from a powerful person, he risks being controlled by their spirit. It's important to note that even if Ruie is defeated, his victims don't get their memories or names back. People who lose their names are completely erased from the world. Relationships, spirit contracts, and memories of them disappear. Those who lose only their memories forget everything about themselves and become like new people. If both their name and memories are taken, they become empty shells, kind of like Overwatch players. They don't eat, age, or even know who they are anymore, almost like they're frozen in time. That said, Ruie can't eat the same person again until they form new memories and a new sense of self. One of Gluttony's strongest abilities, called Eclipse, has 2 parts: Solar Eclipse and Lunar Eclipse. With Lunar Eclipse, Ruie can use the memories, skills, and knowledge of his victims. However, he doesn't get any divine protections, spiritual arts, or authorities that they might have had. Solar Eclipse allows Ruie to take on his victim's appearance by consuming their name. Ruie, along with Ruie and Ruie, also shares the witch factor of gluttony from Daphne, the Witch of Gluttony, which allows them to control witch beasts. This is why attacks by creatures like the white whale often seem to align with the witch cult attacks. Ruie once said that she and her brothers have the ability to create life, just as Daphne created witch beasts centuries ago. While they haven't chosen to do this, it's believed that Ruie could create life if he wanted to. Ruie is another one of the 3 Sin Archbishops who represent gluttony, specifically focused on the gourmet side. Like his younger sister Ruie enjoys eating people's names and memories and doesn't care about the harm he causes. His power, the authority of gluttony, works just like Ruie's, But Ruie makes up for not being as strong as some of the other archbishops by using a flexible, skillful fighting style. In fact, he's considered one of the best martial artists among all the Sin Archbishops. Ruie believes that true strength comes from learning and gaining experiences. He thinks that the more knowledge and memories someone gathers, the more powerful they become. For him, memories are like bonds with others, so by eating these, he believes he becomes the best of all of them. He focuses on the quality of the lives he consumes, often letting his opponents prove themselves to be worthy meals before ultimately taking their memories and abilities through his authority. By gathering so many souls with his power, Ruie gains the skills of his victims, including martial arts and magic, which he can use through the special technique called Lunar Eclipse we talked about in Ruie's section. This has made him incredibly strong in battles, letting him take on many tough opponents at once. Ruie is the final of the 3 Sin Archbishops representing gluttony, and she focuses on satiation, or feeling fully satisfied. As a spiritual being without a real body, she has been stuck inside a place called the Corridor of Memories since she was born. Like her older brothers Ruie and Ruie enjoys eating people's names and memories, caring little about the damage it causes. Unlike her brothers though, Ruie focuses more on who she consumes than how much. Since Ruie doesn't have a body, she uses a power similar to the Great Rabbits. By splitting her witch factor into pieces, she can create copies of herself, attaching her existence to someone else. With this ability, she can leave her real self in the Corridor of Memories while one of her copies takes over another person's body. In one case, she attached herself to Subaru and managed to trap his memories in the Corridor of Memories. Although she acts respectfully towards her brothers, she actually thinks they're foolish for eating so many lives for her sake. Ruie can also take control of her brothers' bodies when she needs to interact with the world or help them escape from trouble. This gives her a unique way to use her authority of gluttony without leaving the Corridor of Memories herself. And no, I am not going to make a joke about her being the ReZero version of a sweaty gamer who doesn't leave her room. I was already hard enough on gamers with that Overwatch comment. I do have limits. Stride Wallachia, the last Sin Archbishop of Pride, came from the Wallachia Empire. Unlike the other Sin Archbishops, Stride never showed any use of an authority. Instead, he fought using a set of 10 cursed rings, which allowed him to control others and cast curses on them. He was the Emperor's son and was once in line for the throne, but after being poisoned and betrayed by his father, Stride joined the witch cult to serve his own goals. There are theories out there that Stride is not a real Sin Archbishop at all, and that he is just posing as one. He wore 5 rings on each hand, and each one could cast a different curse. With them, he could control others' actions and make them his puppets, forcing them to do whatever he commanded. Some of his curses even allowed him to hurt people from a distance or control their very lives. He would sometimes use his rings to push his puppets beyond their limits, often resulting in their deaths. His rings were powerful enough to even control a dragon, one of the proudest creatures in existence. However, using these rings came with a cost. Each time he used a curse, part of his own body would be damaged, turning him over time into a nearly corpse-like figure. One of Stride's most powerful rings, called the Scarlet Little Finger, could make a person's limbs rot and eventually kill them. This ring had a strange scarlet glow and was used by Stride to hold an enemy's life hostage. After one of Stride's fighters, Kurgan, lost in battle, Stride gave the Scarlet Little Finger to Wilhelm, the victor, who cut it in half, stopping the curse from hurting its victim further. The fact that one of the rings can be cut in half so easily is pretty embarrassing. Sauron would never. But yeah, all of these Witches of Sin and Sin Archbishops play a huge role in Subaru's journey, and they help make the story exciting and also pretty freaking terrifying. Let me know down in the comments which witch and Sin Archbishop is your favorite and why. Which of the powers that I mentioned in this video do you think is the strongest, and which would you most like to have if you were one of the witches? Drop me a line down below, I'd love to hear from you. If you're looking for another epic ReZero video to watch right now, check out my video on the full lore and timeline of ReZero, link on screen and in the description. If you want to see more ReZero content on this channel in the future, leave a quick like right now and also subscribe, it's completely free. I will decide which type of content to make next based on how many likes and subs each video gets. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys!